The high desert wind of Silver City, Idaho, screamed through the sagebrush in the autumn of 1885. Inspired by real historical conditions in the American West, this is an AI-assisted fictional story created for storytelling and entertainment. This story includes historical prejudice, illness, and non-graphic threats. No graphic violence or explicit content is depicted. That evening, a young Chinese woman would bring dinner to a lonely cowboy. Before the sun disappeared, she would sit in the chair that had belonged to his dead wife. And the words he whispered next would reopen a heart that had been silent for 3 years. Silas Thorne sat alone on his weathered porch beneath the Hawaii mountains. He was 50 years old, though grief had made him look older. His beard had turned the color of winter frost. His scarred hands rested heavily on his knees. Beside him stood an empty rocking chair. Its seat had been worn smooth by Clara, the woman who had once been the sun to his earth. She had died of fever 3 years earlier. Since that night, Silas had lived like a ghost on his own land. He spoke to his horses more than he spoke to people. He ate cold beans from a tin because the kitchen felt too lonely to light. The townspeople called him the Hermit of the Ridge. Silas preferred their distance. Then, just before sunset, the creak of wagon wheels disturbed the valley silence. A small, sturdy cart, pulled by a single mule, climbed the dusty track. Silas squinted against the dying light. His hand instinctively reached for the porch railing, his knuckles white. It was pinned back with a simple, elegant silver comb. Silas knew her father, a man who had traveled from Guangdong seeking gold. He had found no gold, but he had built a modest life through years of exhausting work in laundries and kitchens. Mei Lin had crossed the ocean several years later to help him. She carried herself with quiet dignity, but there was a loneliness in her eyes that Silas recognized immediately. Mei Lin climbed carefully from the cart and lifted the heavy pot with both hands. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, respecting the invisible boundary around Silas and the empty chair. In her hands, she carried a heavy pewter pot covered with a clean white cloth. Only when Silas gave the smallest nod did she begin to climb the porch steps. Her eyes were kind, steady, and entirely unafraid. Most people avoided the grumpy Thorne, but she didn't blink. "Good evening, Mr. Thorne," she said. Her voice sounded like a soft bell ringing in the cold air. "My father noticed that you have not visited the camp for supplies in nearly 2 weeks." A faint smile touched her lips. "He fears you are living on dust and memories." Silas didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed on the pot. "I don't need charity, Miss May," he grunted. His stomach betrayed him with a loud, hollow growl. Silas looked away, embarrassed. Mei Lin pretended not to notice. Mei Lin didn't flinch or laugh. "It is not charity when a neighbor remembers a friend," she replied gently. The scent of ginger, garlic, and slow-cooked beef drifted from the pot. It was the smell of life. It reminded Silas of a time when the kitchen was full of steam and Clara's laughter. Mei Lin glanced toward Clara's empty rocking chair, but did not approach it. "Would it trouble you if I rested there for a moment?" she asked. "The mule is slow, and the hill is steeper than it looks." Silas's chest tightened. No one had sat in that chair since Clara died. For a long moment he could not answer. Mei Lin lowered her eyes and waited without pressing him. At last, Silas gave the smallest nod. As Mei Lin lowered herself into the chair, the wood creaked. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a jagged whisper. "My wife used to sit right there," he said. Mei Lin paused. Her hands rested quietly on her lap. She did not rise in alarm. She did not offer him an empty apology. Instead, she rested one hand gently against the worn wood. "Then it is a very good chair," she said softly. "It has learned how to hold a person's heart." His eyes stung with a sudden, unexpected moisture. No one in town had dared to mention Clara in years. They treated her death like a closed book that should never be reopened. But this girl, a stranger, from a world Silas didn't understand, spoke of her as a living truth. "She used to watch the birds," Silas said. The words began to spill out like water from a broken dam. "She'd sit there every evening mending my socks. She would tell me about the garden she wanted to plant. Now the garden is nothing but weeds. The socks are full of holes." Mei Lin listened in a silence that gave him room to breathe. She understood more than Silas realized. Her mother and two younger sisters remained across the ocean in Guangdong.
Their letters took months to reach Idaho, and sometimes none came at all. Mei Lin lived with the fear that one day the letters might stop forever. She had learned that grief did not always come from death. Sometimes it came from loving people who were still alive but impossibly far away. Only weeks earlier, terrible news had reached the Idaho camps from Rock Springs, Wyoming. Chinese workers had been attacked and killed by a mob. No graphic details reached Silas's porch, but the fear did. Since then, Mei Lin's father had barred the eatery door before sunset. The Chinese Exclusion Act had already made families like hers feel unwanted and unsafe. Yet Mei Lin had still climbed the lonely road to bring Silas a warm meal.
Her courage humbled him. They sat together for a long time. The stars began to poke holes in the velvet sky. Silas eventually opened the pot and ate the warm food. It was the first meal in years that didn't taste like loneliness. It tasted of dignity. Before we return to the ridge, tell us in the comments, is there someone you still carry in your heart? And if stories of courage, healing, and second chances mean something to you, subscribe and stay with us. Because by the following Thursday, the town had begun to notice Mei Lin's visits. The following Thursday, Mei Lin returned. And the Thursday after that, she brought a basket of mending tools. One evening, a group of 3 men rode up to Silas's gate. Silver City was a small town, and gossip traveled faster than a stagecoach. Mrs. Gable, who ran the boarding house, was among the first to complain. "Silas Thorne is letting that Chinese girl sit in Clara's chair," she whispered at the mercantile. Some townspeople called it improper. Others resented the simple fact that Silas had welcomed Mei Lin as an equal. As autumn deepened, the whispers hardened into open hostility. One evening, a group of 3 men rode up to Silas's gate.
They were led by Jedediah Miller. He was a rough-edged miner with a heart full of unearned pride. "Thorne," Jedediah shouted from his saddle, "we don't want that kind up here on the ridge. It's bad for the town's reputation. It's bad for the law." Silas walked out onto the porch. He stood at the edge of the porch, his broad frame blocking the doorway. He wasn't a violent man by nature, but he was a man who had finally found a reason to stand tall again.
"This is my land," Silas said. His voice was as steady as the mountain itself. "And any friend of mine is welcome on this porch. If you have a problem with the company I keep, you can take it up with the trail back to town." Jedediah spat on the ground, his face twisted in rage. "You're choosing an outsider over your own people, Silas?" "I'm choosing a human being over a pack of wolves," Silas countered. The men grumbled, but they didn't challenge the cold look in Silas's eyes. They rode away, leaving a trail of dust and whispered threats. Only after the riders disappeared did Silas notice Mei Lin standing near the garden gate.
She had heard everything. "You should not have to fight the whole town for me," she said. Silas looked at her for a long moment. "Maybe I'm not fighting only for you," he replied. "Maybe I'm fighting for the man I should have been years ago." Mei Lin heard the rumors, of course. She knew the risks she was taking by visiting the lonely rancher. But she saw something in Silas that she saw in her own father. She saw a man trying to survive in a world that had taken too much from him. She saw a soul that refused to let the darkness win.
One afternoon, she helped Silas pull weeds from Clara's old flower bed. The earth was dry and stubborn. As she dug near the roots of a dead rosebush, her fingers hit something hard. It was a small, rusted tin box. She handed it to Silas. He opened it with trembling, dirt-stained fingers. Inside was a faded photograph of Silas and Clara on their wedding day. Next to it lay a dried yellow ribbon. Silas took the box, his breath hitching. "I thought I'd lost this," he whispered. His voice cracked like dry timber. Silas stared at the faded photograph for a long time. Then shame passed across his face. "I buried this after Clara's funeral," he admitted. "I could not bear to see her face, but I could not bring myself to burn it." He touched the yellow ribbon with a trembling thumb. "Afterward, I was too ashamed to dig it up." He looked at Mei Lin. She was covered in dirt. Her work dress was stained at the knees, but she did not seem to notice. She didn't care about the silk. She only cared about the light returning to his eyes. Tears cut clean paths through the dust on Silas's weathered cheeks. In that moment, the age gap and the cultural divide vanished. They were just two souls finding a way to mend what was broken. "You should plant new roses," Malin said softly. Not to replace her, but to show her that the beauty she loved is still alive. Silas nodded, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on his cheek. He realized then that he wasn't just honoring Clara by grieving. He was honoring her by living. The winter of 1885 came early and struck the Owyhee Mountains with unusual cruelty. The snow piled high against the cabin walls. The wind howled like a wounded beast night after night. Silas fell ill with a chest cold that turned into pneumonia. It threatened to take him to the same grave as his wife. Malin didn't hesitate. Despite the danger of the mountain passes, she made it to the ranch. To protect her reputation, she slept in the small guest room while her father returned whenever the weather allowed. She brewed herbal teas her grandmother had taught her in China. She prepared the remedies her grandmother had taught her as a child. They could not promise a cure, but the warmth, broth, and constant care gave Silas's weakened body a chance to fight. She kept the fire alive through the longest nights, even when exhaustion made her hands tremble. She stayed by his bedside, whispering stories. She told him of the Great Wall and the cherry blossoms of her homeland. She told him of the courage it took to cross an ocean for a dream. The townspeople said she was taking over. They said she was bewitching the old man, but Silas knew the truth. She was saving his life with every spoonful of broth and every hour of vigil. In the depths of his delirium, Silas saw Clara. She wasn't calling him to the grave. She was pointing toward the window, toward the rising sun. She was telling him it wasn't his time yet. When the spring thaw finally came, Silas emerged from the cabin. He was a changed man. He walked down to the town mercantile. He didn't walk as a hermit. He walked as a neighbor. He bought seeds, pounds and pounds of rose seeds and vegetable starts. He also bought a new rocking chair. The chair was made of sturdy oak and polished until it shone in the spring sunlight. Silas placed it beside Clara's weather chair. It was not meant to replace the past. It was an invitation to share the future. He looked at the two chairs side by side. "Thank you for sitting there," he said. "I think Clara would have liked you." Malin smiled, a genuine warm expression that lit up the entire valley. "I think I would have liked her too," she replied. The town eventually grew quiet with their gossip. The town did not change all at once. Some people never changed at all. But others had seen Malin cross the mountain in winter to save a man everyone else had abandoned. When Jedediah tried to stir up anger again, fewer men were willing to stand beside him. Even Mrs. Gable eventually left a basket of bread at the ranch gate without signing her name. By the following spring, Malin no longer arrived only on Thursdays. Sometimes she came with dinner. Sometimes she came with seeds or letters from town. And sometimes she came with nothing at all, because Silas had become reason enough for the journey. Their affection grew slowly, without grand declarations. Silas never asked Malin to become another Clara. Malin never asked him to forget the woman he had lost. They simply made room for one another. On a warm autumn evening, 1 year after she first brought him dinner, Silas stood beside the two rocking chairs. "I cannot offer you a young man's future," he said, "but every day I have left would be yours if you wanted it." Malin looked at the garden they had brought back to life. Then she looked into his eyes. "I did not come here looking for a young man's future," she answered. "I came looking for a place where my heart would not be treated as foreign." They were married quietly beneath the Owyhee peaks. Her father stood beside her. Clara's yellow ribbon was tied around the first bouquet of roses from the restored garden. The story of the lonely cowboy and the girl in the silk dress became a legend. It was a reminder that love doesn't follow the rules of geography. It doesn't care about the color of a person's skin. It only follows the path of the heart. True courage isn't found in the pull of a trigger. It is found in the opening of a closed door. True justice isn't found in the laws of men. It is found in the kindness we show to the marginalized. When Silas finally passed away at the age of 80, he was at peace. He was buried next to Clara, under the shade of the Owyhee peaks. In his hand he held the yellow ribbon from the tin box, and on his porch, 2 rocking chairs remained. They sat there for many years, side by side. They watched the sun set over the mountains every single night. One was weathered and gray, holding the memories of the past. The other was strong and polished, holding the hope of the future. Neither was more important than the other, because a porch, like a heart, is always big enough for more than one story. A heart is big enough to hold both the sorrow of what was lost and the joy of what was found. Thank you for staying with Silas and Mei-Lin until the end. If their story touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up and share it with someone who may need a little hope today. Subscribe for more stories of love, courage, and second chances from the American West. And tell us in the comments, can the heart honor a love from the past while still opening itself to a new one? Until next time, keep your memories close and your heart open.